Hi, I'm Nando, and I view movies. If you don't watch till the end of my videos, and maybe just if you haven't done that in the last couple of months, never seen my face, but this is who I am. It's nice to finally be seen by you guys. 2018 has been amazing. Not just making all these videos, but like talking to you guys, interacting with you guys about how you feel about them, what movies you like, what movies you don't like, stuff like that. It's so cool. I get a lot of it on Twitter, twitter.com/NandoVMovies. Please follow me. I get a lot of it on Reddit, the Nando V Movies subreddit, and a fair amount of it I get in the YouTube comments. The tough part is with YouTube comments, a lot of them come in through the day, and some of them require a really long explanation, a conversation I really want to have, but just don't necessarily have the time for it at that moment, and I'll either forget about it or just won't have time for it later in the day either. But I don't want you guys to think that if I don't respond to a comment of yours, that means I disagree with you or anything like that. And there are some videos where I have a single comment that I get a lot, like one thought you guys have, criticism, something I got wrong, something I missed. And now that we're at the end of 2018, I wanted to take some time to look back at some of those videos, go through some of these comments that I get a lot, and give you guys an answer to them. I think it's gonna be fun and probably something I'll end up doing every year. I'm gonna call it frequently commented comments. And in this frequently commented comments, we're gonna go through all of my videos. So like from 2016 to 2018. In the future, I'll probably do it yearly at the end of the year as like a wrap up thing. So Sharon Carter theory, great place to start. The premise for this video is, what if Sharon Carter was secretly working with Zemo? Either she was on his team or she was a mind controlled Hydra agent, mostly because something like that happened in the comics. And it would fit in really conveniently with his plan because a bunch of the things she does are things he also kind of needs to do. So like she tells Steve where to find Bucky. If Steve doesn't find Bucky, there's a good chance Bucky gets killed either by the people that are trying to get him or by Black Panther, who neither of them could know was on the way, but still, it's convenient that Steve is there. Anyway, the comment I get there is, hey, that's not really how Zemo's plan is working. Zemo's plan is a lot of improvisation. It's not as much that if you pulled one specific Jenga block out of the tower, the whole thing would collapse. He's constantly revising the plan, which I mostly agree with. However, I do think he's put so much thought into some parts of the plan. Like, he went through the effort of killing the psychologist that was going to interview Bucky, and I guess faking his credentials and changing them so he didn't get flagged as not that guy in the system, and sending the EMP, and just being the first person to interview Bucky after he gets captured. Like, I feel like he wouldn't meticulously plan all of that, but then leave some of these elements up to chance. I'm not saying that the movie doesn't work the way it is. I'm just saying that the way I kind of envision Zemo, he would have planned every step of this plan out, and he would be able to improvise. But I think him getting Bucky captured is such an important detail of the plan, the way he has already planned it out, that I just can't see a version of it where he leaves that up to chance, which is why Sharon Carter makes it so convenient. Spider-Man problem, another one of my first videos. I get this one a lot. The idea is that I think it's a little weird that Tony Stark recruits Peter Parker, a 15 or 16-year-old that he doesn't seem to know, he just kind of seems to be aware of. And a version that I think would make a little bit more sense would be one where Peter Parker shows up at the airport fight without being invited, and Tony is against it, right? So that's kind of the version I rewrote. The criticism I get there is the way I introduced Peter Parker in that version of the movie. It would slam hard cut from Captain America political intrigue to here's some kid at a high school, and that would be jarring and wouldn't really fit with the tone of the movie. I understand that criticism, and I don't think the version I wrote is perfect. I would imagine you could still fit him into the story more naturally, have him be, interning for Stark already in some capacity. Maybe he's already at LaGuardia when the fight starts. I think there are more natural ways to introduce Peter into the story, but I do think a change like that would work with the airport fight that I've set up. Fox loves forests. Just me talking about the fact that 20th Century Fox loves to shoot movies and scenes from movies in forests. And a lot of the times it's kind of out of place. A lot of you guys commented with other forests that you think are equally silly. I think the one I like best was Return of the Jedi, which people forget was owned by 20th Century Fox. Return of the Jedi is the last chapter of this gigantic, sprawling space opera that ends in a forest with little teddy bears throwing rocks at stormtroopers. Like, it is a really weird way to end that movie and that series of movies. And it is one of the first ones historically where a forest just comes out of nowhere. So it is interesting to think about Star Wars in that context too. Ego is an ego. This is a great one because I got this one super wrong. So the idea is I compared Star Fox, or Aries, a Marvel Comics character, to Edward VIII, who historically, as far as I understood, abdicated the throne so that he could be with a woman. So giving up royalty to get married, which is kind of what Aries does. And I mostly made that comparison because I read it and I'd seen the King's Speech, and I kind of thought that was what that character's deal was. I did not realize how much of a Nazi sympathizer Edward VIII was. I'm not saying that the comparison between the two characters is wrong, but that is an interesting detail of that character's life that I left out, and I don't sympathize in any way with his beliefs, so just want to make that super clear. Big gray villains this year, 2018, we got a bunch of gray villains, most notably Riot, the worst probably in the history of big gray villains, because he's just gray, like 100% a big gray version of Venom, and that was specifically one of the reasons why he was chosen, is because he's big and gray, which is just like, oh my god. So that's interesting. Otherwise, I think this year's villains were actually pretty good. Like Thanos was great, Orm was great, and it's not just because they're both super purple, which is a color I love. Like the Black Order's black, but what are you gonna do? That's kind of their deal in the comics. Like, I don't necessarily mind if a black or gray character is black or gray. It's situations where movies go out of their way to gray up a character in the comics that isn't traditionally gray, and I just think in a lot of instances that's silly, and we've seen from new movies that you can make that look cool. So, 2018 has been hit or miss. Skrull War Machine. This is a great one of my favorites, because 2018 has still not disproven this possibility that Rhodey, aka War Machine, is secretly a Skrull. Now, people have said that Sharon Carter, especially based on some of the things I said in my video, might also be a Skrull. Yes, I think her, I think Thunderbolt Ross, I think Everett Ross are all great possible candidates for being a Skrull. I do think at some level it can't just be all government officials, because that's a little bit like the Hydra reveal in Winter Soldier anyway, but I do think a lot of those guys would also be great Skrulls. The point a lot of people make in the comments that it feels worth addressing is the idea that, no, War Machine can't be a Skrull, because in Civil War, he breaks his back, doctors examine him, they would know if he was a Skrull or not. So I've two issues with that. The first one is, in the comics a lot of the time, the Skrull are indistinguishable from people as long as they're not killed. And since War Machine doesn't die, hypothetically, if we're playing by Marvel Skrull rules, they shouldn't be able to figure out that he's a Skrull. My second thought, that I think is a little bit more important and will come up in another video, is it doesn't matter. The rules of how Skrull work are completely fluid. They have not, at this point at least, been introduced in a Marvel movie yet. So Marvel can do whatever they want. And I'm a big proponent of doing whatever you want, like changing the rules to tell the best story, right? There's like an adage like, how do you kill a vampire? And the answer is, however you want. Vampires aren't real. Like, if you can tell a better story by killing them in a different way, and if you can tell a better story by having a Skrull work a slightly different way than it does in the comics, that's fine, because it's all about, in the end of the day, having a great movie. Now, usually the rules have to be consistent with the rules you're setting up within the movie universe. So I'm not saying that, like, if Skrulls turn out to be found out if they sleep or something, like if they turn back into Skrulls when they become unconscious, then this theory probably doesn't hold up. However, as of now, we don't have any hard and fast rules for Skrull. Captain Marvel hasn't come out yet, so I don't think War Machine being knocked out necessarily disproves that theory. Hela isn't Hela. Sometimes people will say Hela is also based off of the Norse mythology character Hel. Yeah, for sure. The reason I didn't put that in was because Hela from the comics is based off of Hel, and then this Hela is clearly based off the Hela from the comic. So yeah, like, I agree, but I just didn't make the distinction in the original video. Extremist Opportunity. This is another one where I was plain old wrong. So I described Tony's state in Iron Man 3 as him being a paranoid nutcase, right? And that's not really it. When you look at the entire movie, the idea is he's suffering from PTSD, which is a real thing and not a joke, and if you are affected by it, that doesn't make you a paranoid nutcase. Vibranium Dilemma. So the idea is that Black Panther should have been able to neutralize both his and Killmonger's vibranium so that their fight had more stakes. And I propose doing that via shadow physics, which is one of the things in Marvel Comics that lets you do that. A lot of people said that that's too complicated of a concept to bring up also in this movie, especially this late in the game. Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think you necessarily have to use shadow physics to do it. Just have Shuri say, oh, and we figured out this way to render vibranium inert in early in the movie, and say, like, oh, we got to look at that. And then later in the movie say, I think we should use it as part of our attack. Like, I think that's a fine idea. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Loki Skrull Salvation. Just want to point out, I called that Loki would get killed pretty much immediately in Infinity War, so I don't think that was that much of a shocker, but I do want to take credit. Altering Ultron. So this is the reason I started doing a video like this and kind of thinking about these answers. In my version of Age of Ultron, the twins start bad and switch sides to good, but I never put a moment in my version of the movie that explained that or that set them on that path. And the reason is because I forgot. Like, I had done it at one point in the planning stages, but I never brought that into the movie. So the way I would have done it is just have the twins, because the movie splits the twins up from some of these other villains that are recruited by Ultron, like Crossbones and Abomination. So I'd have the twins just see this Crossbones and Abomination fight that's going on in South Korea and, like, see how it's going. And they would notice that Crossbones and Abomination are like causing destruction and putting people in danger, and the Avengers, and not Iron Man, because he's not fighting them at the time. He fought the twins earlier, but he's not in South Korea, so he's the one they really don't like. So they would see like Thor and Captain America and Falcon fighting to save people, and that would be what makes them realize we're on the wrong side and Ultron is bad. So that's why they would switch. Like maybe they wouldn't switch immediately, but during the final fight they'd have that change of heart. Disarming Aries, this is a comment I get sometimes. People say my Aries monologue is a little long and it would make the movie too long and it would kind of slow down the movie a little bit. I understand that. I think there's a difference between a long and a short movie and a good and a bad movie, right? Infinity War was super long. Justice League was much shorter, but it doesn't mean a shorter movie is better. And I think pacing, you can kind of work with that, right? In the original version of Diana and Aries' conversation, you're cutting back to footage of Steve Trevor and friends just doing things on the airfield. So I think you could do that and edit in a way that would make the conversation flow a little bit more naturally and would keep the movie going. Paging Dr. Poison, this is an interesting one, and I chose not to put this bit in the video, but I think it's definitely worth explaining. So the idea here is, at the end of the movie, I had proposed that Wonder Woman should evacuate the plane on her own. So she should pull her parachute, fly out, understanding that Steve and Dr. Poison are both going to die on this plane. And that's just like a decision she makes, because she's like, you know what, Steve, you're right. I have to be a hero. I have to save the world. Some people posited the version of the movie where Steve pulls Diana's parachute. So she's like, I'm not going to leave you, Steve. And he's like, you don't have a choice, pulls the parachute, and then she flies away and he goes and dies. I considered that, but the main reason I didn't go with it is because I think Diana's choice to leave has to be her choice. Like, she has to make the choice to leave. That can't be a decision that Steve makes for her, right? The whole movie is about Diana becoming this hero to humanity, savior to humanity, right? So I like the idea personally more that the last choice in the movie is her giving up this one thing that she cares about, which is Steve Trevor and a possible relationship with him, sacrificing that to be a hero in the future. Plus, like, I think it'd be weird if the last decision made for Diana in a Wonder Woman movie was made by a man. Thor Detour. Okay, now we're starting the two that I get the most often. And honestly, I've wanted to address these for a while because I think like the challenges here are really interesting and I think they're super valid points and I kind of have an explanation, but this one takes up like paragraphs and paragraphs. So it's really hard for me to weigh in on every single comment and I don't want people to think I'm like dismissing them by not commenting. So the idea here, my premise for the video, is that the Thor going to get Stormbreaker quest, which takes up like 20-30 minutes of the movie. Probably not that much, but at least like 15-20 minutes of the movie. I don't think the stakes work there because I don't think there's any reality where Thor isn't going to get the hammer or where Thor is going to die. And that's what the drama of that moment is based on. So while that's all happening, I'm just like, yep, this is going to keep going. Like eventually, let's get back to Titan. Let's get back to the Wakanda battle. Because at least with those, you know, something interesting can happen. Whereas with this, he's going to get it. And he does. Right? So I made the case that there wasn't any growth for Thor. And there wasn't any growth in general. So one of the things people say is, well, Groot did grow. Like Groot becomes more of an active fighter and he sacrifices his arm and puts down the video game. Which sure, I mean, he sacrifices his arm, but it grows back immediately. So, you know, I don't see that as that big of a sacrifice. But also, the thing that I hear the most is that Thor did sacrifice something. You know, he lost his brother. He lost half of his people. He lost a lot of Asgardians before that. He lost Asgard. His dad died. He lost his hammer, right? That all happens. So Thor deserves to get this hammer and he doesn't have to sacrifice for it, which sure. And I think that's kind of what the movie was doing, like what Infinity War was doing on its own. My problem with that is all of that happens before Thor decides to get the hammer, right? So from the moment he decides to get the hammer to when he gets it, he doesn't really sacrifice anything that as an audience member, I'm like, oh man, he's really gonna, you know, lose something important here. Someone made the case in my subreddit that Heimdall should have sacrificed himself in that moment. Like he survives and then he goes to Nidavellir or Nidavellir or however that's pronounced, because in the movie, if you watch that scene with Thor and Rocket, they both pronounce it differently. Like that first scene, I think that's so weird because I'm pretty sure Rocket pronounces it right and Thor pronounces it wrong. It's Nidavellir versus Nidavellir. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I'm not saying that Thor needed to sacrifice more because he didn't sacrifice enough. It's just that I don't think the drama in that scene worked because there wasn't anything at stake. There wasn't anything I realistically thought they would lose. And there wasn't anything they realistically did lose. But I think if Drax or Rocket or Groot, although I don't think that really would have worked because he was too young, if one of them had sacrificed themselves to make Stormbreaker, then I think that moment would have had a lot more weight. Also, in retrospect, it would have been a really convenient way to write out Batista. They couldn't have known that, but now he's not super hype on these Guardians movies, and wouldn't it have been great if they could have killed him in a really meaningful way and not have to deal with him not wanting to be in these anymore? Just a thought. The giant mistake. Iron Giant and Ready Player One. So this one I get the most, by far. People ask if I've read the book. A, no, I haven't. B, even if I had, I try to judge these as their own thing. Right? So if there is a rule in a book or something that happens in the book, I don't try to play by that rule or imagine that thing in the movie, like when I'm seeing it. That's not the same as the scroll thing. I'm saying, like, I don't inherently play by rules of books. Whereas with the scroll, there are no rules. But the idea with this video is that the bad guy, Nolan Sorrento, should have had an Iron Giant that he uses to fight the good guys, which the good guys could use their knowledge of the movie Iron Giant to exploit. Which you would figure is something Halliday would know. Like, he would program this in because he wants the players not just to value pop culture trivia, but to value what it means. And as a huge Iron Giant fan, I do think it's weird that he is a gun in this movie and the good guys are making him do that. Like, I think that's weird. So the comment I get there is, well, in the movie, the Iron Giant is not a person. Like, he isn't a living thing or like a construct. He is an avatar. So a character is piloting him the same way that characters look like Master Chief and are using Master Chief's weapons. So what I'm describing doesn't work or wouldn't fit into the movie. Two things. One, I think there are constructs in this movie that I'm kind of expecting the Iron Giant to work a little bit more like. The examples I use are the T-Rex and King Kong from The Race and the Chucky weapon, right? Those aren't piloted by people as far as we know. Those are just kind of robots playing by a certain set of rules that has been programmed into them. So I think having the Iron Giant work that way would be fine. But more importantly, and this kind of goes back to the Skrull thing, I think the rules of this universe are pretty fluid. Like, you can change things and it still works. And I think if you believe that this makes a better story, like I do, and if you don't, then it's fine. You don't have to change anything. That's pretty much true of all of these videos. But if you think that a version where the Iron Giant is a sentient thing is the better version of the movie, then I think changing the rules doesn't matter, because none of this is real. There's not a real way that the Iron Giant works in a real oasis, so you can do whatever you want. Like, I don't think, you can have a historical Lincoln biopic where Lincoln flies away, because there is a hard and fast set of rules associated with how Abraham Lincoln works. But I'm saying, like, in this movie, I think it makes sense to have an Iron Giant that is a robotic construct kind of thing. But again, if you don't agree with my assessment of the movie and like what I think could use a change in that movie, then that's fine. Like, you're not wrong and the movie isn't bad. It's just like my opinion. And I'm not saying that I think I'm smarter than screenwriters or better than screenwriters in any way. What I do is 100%, easier than actually writing a screenplay and working under studio rules and constraints. Hindsight is 2020. I have a huge advantage. I'm not saying I'm doing a better job than these guys. I just kind of take this as like a fun exercise and a way to teach myself how to be a better writer, is kind of going through these scenarios. So I don't want you guys to think that I believe I'm better at being a screenwriter than all these guys, because I know it's an insanely hard job. X-Men, Hopeless Horseman. This is a really cool one because someone reminded me of something from the comics. I'm reminded's a bad word because honestly, I'd never heard of this before. The idea of my video was, I think the end of this movie should have involved like smaller fights, like kind of one-on-one or two-on-two fights, or two-on-one fights really, between a teacher and a student, or a mentor and a mentee, or two family members, right? So the last one of these fights is Scott Summers' Cyclops versus mind-controlled Alex Summers' Havoc. And I figured their fight would just be them shooting lasers at each other, which isn't the greatest thing in the world, but like could be cool. And a couple people pointed out that there exists this thing in Marvel Comics called the Summers immunity, which means if Scott and Alex both like shot their blasts at each other, it wouldn't work. It would cancel out, which means they'd have to fist fight, which is another great reason to send Scott to fight Alex, because it's not even just you want to fight him, it's you're the person best suited to fight him because you'll be able to minimize the damage he can do. I think that's really cool. Also, I asked the question at the end of this video if any of you guys had watched X-Men Evolution, because it was one of my favorite shows, and so many of you guys said you love it, and that is so cool to me because it was one of my favorite shows growing up and really influenced kind of how I think about the X-Men. So it's awesome to hear that that wasn't, some kind of small niche thing, because I don't hear about it all that much. Pressing the dinosaur button, my big suggestion was having Blue free the rest of the dinosaurs instead of the weird little clone girl at the end of Jurassic World, the Lost Island of Dinosaurs, or whatever it's called. A lot of commenters said that sounds a lot like Caesar at the end of the first new Planet of the Apes movie. It does. And I chose that ending specifically because I wanted whatever happened in this movie to gel with what's probably going to happen in the third movie. And I totally believe that's the direction they're going. Like, I think we are getting super intelligent dinosaurs taking over the world or something. A lot of people in the comments have pointed out how stupid a premise that is. Not like stupid, like it wouldn't be fun to see, but just like what happens when it's winter and all dinosaurs die. But I think that's the direction they're going in. Like, if I was in charge of the movie, I wouldn't write it like that at all. But I do want to fit it within the existing framework. The Fifth Defender, a bunch of people pointed out that my post-credit scene would ruin Daredevil Season 3 because it would just completely clash with it. 100%. I agree. Daredevil Season 3 is like one of my favorite seasons of television in the last 5 years, I guess. I can't even tell you. It's so good. And if you don't watch Daredevil, you don't watch any of those shows, that's fine. Watch Daredevil Season 3. It's awesome. And I'm totally fine with throwing my, post-credit scene out into the trash because Daredevil Season 3 is that good. Justice League Rewrite was mainly positive. The one comment I got a lot was, why isn't Clayface impersonating Lex Luthor in the prison? And the answer is, he should be. It's a way better idea than what I came up with. Every man is stupid and he doesn't matter. The reason I had him in, I think, is because I wrote that scene a lot earlier than I wrote some of the rest of these scenes, because I just thought that scene would be fun if we get a drop in where it's revealed that Lex Luthor actually isn't in prison. And I went through the list of DC comic shapeshifters, and every man stood out to me as like a character that would fit that bill. Knowing the Clayface is in this movie, yeah, he would be perfect for that. And he'd probably be better because he's even better at blending in, and he's like an actor. Like, Basil Carlo is supposed to be an actor, so like hypothetically this would be cool for him to play this role of Luthor. Like, some of these scenes I wrote out, and this is one of the scenes that like I have a script for, and I think he fits into that script better than every man does. So like, I think you guys are 100% right. Last few. So Venom villain revamp. Someone on Reddit wrote a great comment pretty much describing that one thing about telling stories about paralyzed characters, which in my version of the movie, Spencer Smythe is the villain, and he's so interested in Venom because he wants to heal his paralyzed son, Alistair Smythe. Both Spider-Man villains who haven't really been in anything yet. The idea behind this comment that I think is super thoughtful and I really respect. The idea is that in a story about a paralyzed character, it is more thoughtful to have the paralyzed character also not want to be cured. So like, Spencer wants to cure Alistair's paralysis, but Alistair doesn't care. Which is such a no-brainer, not just for that reason, but because that sets up a really interesting dynamic that's very similar to the Harry Norman Osborn dynamic from the original 3, like the Raimi Spider-Man movies, which would be a cool dynamic to set up as like a throwback to those movies in Venom, where Alistair and Spencer Smythe have this rift because Alistair doesn't think Spencer listens to him and believes in him. And then when Spencer is killed, Alistair feels really guilty because he's like, oh, my dad was just trying to help me and I've got to get revenge. That would be a great motivating factor if he feels that guilt because their original relationship wasn't great. So I think that's a great suggestion. Brand Post Howard, thank you for that comment, and you guys can check that out on the Nando V Movie subreddit. Suicide Squad 2, a couple people have pointed out two things. One, if this movie is about getting a spear, this would be the second DC EU Worlds of DC, whatever we're calling it, movie where a spear is a pivotal plot point, because like Batman v Superman involves the kryptonite spear. That's a good point. There are a lot of DC Comics super weapons that this could hypothetically be. I chose the spear because its powers are super nebulous. It can do whatever you want, but it could be something else. I wouldn't be completely married to using the Spear of Destiny. Another comment I got, people are saying maybe Amanda Waller organized this prison riot that broke out Bronze Tiger's villains and gets Bronze Tiger to go onto the team. Absolutely, I 100% agree. That's kind of the way I wrote it, and I just think that having her pulling strings and getting what she wants is one of the things that I think Amanda Waller really needed to do more of in Suicide Squad. She is supposed to be this just insanely smart master manipulator, so I think having her do small things like that, and maybe even leaving it up to the audience to decide if she did it or not, would be a really cool way to set her up as an intimidating character. Rewriting Screenslaver, main comment I got for this, Evelyn uses the word cowboy a lot, and it's kind of distracting. I didn't realize that until I read these comments. You're absolutely right. You could probably cut one or two of those out. Fixing the finales, this is my Incredibles 2 finale change. I would say I get two big comments for this. One is it would take too long, which, again, a long movie isn't worse than a short movie. And I think as long as it's paced well, it's fine. I also think we spend a lot of time on the hydrofoil chasing Jack around and things like that. Like, I think that part of the movie takes long enough that I have a feeling you could keep the movie relatively the same length if you took that out and added what I'm adding, especially if the Underminer fight isn't all that long, maybe only like 10-15 minutes. The other change I got was that the Underminer feels tacked on. I would say kind of the opposite. I think it's really necessary to have him show up again. Not just because he would have a fun battle scene where everyone would be able to show off their powers and it would just be cool, but because I think the Underminer represents the problem that the Incredibles, because of political pressure, weren't able to solve. So putting them in a situation where they get another shot at that, using this new information and solving this problem, I think makes a lot of sense. The change you would make that I also did leave out, which was kind of a mistake, is I would have footage of him in the background of a lot of shots. So have Evelyn constantly be hearing that the Underminer continues to rob banks and the Underminer keeps doing stuff. That way, when he shows up, it's not as jarring, but also it creates this tension like, oh man, she really needs to fix the law so that she can solve these other problems, not just the screenslaver problem that she is allowed to solve, like the Underminer and even other villains that we're not seeing because they know how much of a danger this is. But really, you know, that's it. It's been super cool to interact with you guys over the comments and Twitter and stuff. Here's a list of the patrons. You guys are the best. If you guys want to see videos early, have some input, because there have been some changes that I've made to videos before I put them out. Things I've removed or even things I've added based on what patrons say. Chuck in literally any amount of money, patreon.com/NandoVMovies. It means so much to me, and it's really cool that over this year, I've been able to get, you know, so many patrons on board. I'm really excited for 2019. Here's a very short preview of some of the videos I'm going to be making. So that was fun. Look out for them in the next couple of months. Not necessarily in that order, but eventually those will probably come out. And besides that, you know, thank you guys for listening to Mostly Nitpicking, the podcast that me and DJ do, where we pick apart a piece of pop culture by looking exclusively at the details. Done a lot of fun episodes this year, a lot on movies that I will be incorporating the changes from those episodes into future videos. So if you want to get a sneak peek at some of that, it might be in there. Besides that, follow me on Twitter, subscribe to the subreddit, share videos with your friends, all that stuff. Thank you so much for supporting the channel in 2018. That's all I got. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.